That Christmas Eve in Boston, the wind sliced down the brownstone row like it meant to empty the streets, and I stood on my parents' porch, with my daughter's mittened hand in mine, watching the windows glow with someone else's joy. Inside, music drifted over clinking glasses, the kind of cheer that promises warmth if you belong. My phone buzzed, and my mother's voice arrived soft and polished, the way you speak to a stranger you'll never see again. "Honey, there isn't enough space this year. Brooke has the kids." Lily hugged 2 red-wrapped gifts she'd folded with fierce care, her eyes searching my face for the right answer. I bent to smooth a curl behind her ear and said, "We're going to make our own place." Though the words scraped on the way out, snow hissed against the steps, the door never opened. By the time we turned back to the sidewalk, the cold had already found its way through our coats, but it couldn't explain the shiver that started somewhere deeper. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand outside a door you were told was family, hit the like and subscribe so I know we're not alone tonight. My name is Hannah Cooper, and I grew up south of the city where winters smell like wood smoke and the church bells carry over the rooftops on Sunday mornings. My parents, Margaret and Dennis, raised us on tidy rules: work hard, speak kindly, show up, looking put together. I believed all of it, and when Lily came along, I kept those same promises. Dinner around the table, please and thank you, a hand offered instead of a pointed finger. We lived in a 1-bedroom walk-up in South Boston with a heater that rattled at night, the radiator ticking like a tired metronome, and I learned to work after bedtime, blue light on my face, while I built brand identities for coffee shops that paid late and boutiques that paid in praise. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't the kind of career my parents could explain at cocktail parties, but it was honest, and I was building something I could place Lily's future on brick by careful brick. The contrast between the world I was making and the world I came from sharpened with every holiday visit. At my parents' house, every ribbon matched every place setting gleamed, and the laughter flowed toward my sister's family as if a current had been set long ago. Brooke's life fit the picture: a husband in a navy suit who never seemed to wrinkle, and 3 children in velvet who never left a crumb. I arrived with a child whose tights always snagged and a tote full of snacks and crayons, because late meals turn 7-year-olds into pumpkins. I brought homemade cookies and the kind of hope you can't write down, hope that this year might be different, that someone would meet us at the door and say, "We saved you a seat." That hope had a way of shrinking in the hallway coat, half on half off, while my father asked if I'd ever thought about a real job, meaning something with a badge or a parking space and a nameplate on a desk. I learned how silence feels in a crowded room. It settles over your shoulders even when the radiator hums and the oven breathes heat into the air. It sits beside you when you pull a folding chair to the corner when you count forks and find that the table fits everyone except the girl you carried and the woman you've become. I tucked my chin, smiled for photos, kept Lily's cup full, and tried to turn hurt into manners. Back home after she fell asleep, I opened my laptop and turned what I'd swallowed into lines and palettes and marks that looked like confidence even when I didn't feel it. Clients started to say words I'd been starving to hear: dependable, thoughtful, the one we trust, and I stacked those words in a quiet place no one could reach, a little shelf where my daughter's picture stood. The first rupture came with a sentence that pretended to be practical. "There isn't enough space," my mother said, and I could hear the weight of it arranging the room without us. I looked at Lily's gifts, one for Nana, one for Granddad, and I felt the old rules shift under my feet. Work hard, speak kindly, show up. What did showing up mean? When the door stayed closed. Snow gathered on the porch rail, the wreath swayed and released a whisper of pine. I pictured the long table inside someone's hand, setting out the last glass, a chair slid forward, a napkin folded for a child who had never been asked to give up her seat. My thumb hovered over my mother's number. The music rose behind the glass, and just before I pressed call, a new thought, small, steady, lifted its head. If there's no room, maybe it's time to build one. The thought was small but steady. If there's no room, build one. I carried it down the icy steps that night, Lily's mitten in my palm, our breath lifting into the dark like 2 thin clouds. We walked past the lit windows and the neat hedges strung with white lights, and I kept my eyes forward because looking back was a habit I couldn't afford. I drove us home with the heat on high, the radio low, and the feeling that a line had been drawn even if no one else could see it yet. The next year, we were invited. I told myself to be grateful, and I meant it. We arrived early with a tin of ginger cookies and a small gift Lily and I had wrapped together in gold paper. The house looked like a postcard fresh garland on the banister, a wreath with a red bow, the smell of cinnamon and butter rolling out of the kitchen. I slipped out of my coat and heard my mother's voice from the dining room. "You can sit here, dear." She pointed at a folding chair placed near the microwave tucked against a rolling cart with extra napkins. "Brooke's family needs the main table. The kids should be together." I nodded and thanked her. Lily glanced from her cousins to the long table, then to our corner. Her small shoulders lifted and fell, as if she were bracing against a draft no one else felt. We settled across from the dishwasher. Dishes clinked and a timer buzzed. At the big table, Brooke set napkins at each plate like she was running a show. The dining room glowed with candles, the centerpiece full of berries and pine cones, the kind of arrangement that makes a photo look festive. Lily's plate came late and light. My father stopped on his way by and asked in a voice that tried to be casual, "How's the freelancing? You think about a real job yet? Something steady?" I told him my clients were growing, that I had 3 new contracts. He clapped my shoulder once and carried a platter to the main table. When the toast began, Lily stood to listen, her fork still. We clinked our water glasses. In the background, the dishwasher drained. The 3rd year we were sent to the basement. The stairs were carpeted clean, and a space heater hummed on a card table as if an extra appliance could take the edge off. Upstairs, the floorboards carried the sound of chairs sliding and silver touching plates. "It's cozy down here," Margaret said, setting a tray with 2 bowls of green beans and a small plate of rolls. "This way the kids don't get overwhelmed." She set down a paper napkin with snowmen and kissed Lily's hair. "Be good for Mommy." Then she was gone in a swish of satin. Lily sat on the old sofa with a plate balanced on her knees. She set her doll beside the cushion and whispered, "Is this where we belong?" I told her we had our own little camp, our own quiet. She smiled because she is polite and because children learn how to keep a peace they didn't ask for. By the 4th year, the invitation came late. 2 in the afternoon on the 24th, my phone lit with my mother's number. "Oh, honey, I almost forgot. You can stop by if you want. Don't bring much, maybe napkins." I drove over with a package of store-bought napkins and a loaf of bread, which looked silly on a counter lined with crystal dishes, and a roast resting under foil. Brooke arrived in matching green with her children, their shoes polished, their hair slicked smooth. Everyone cooed and laughed as if a parade had arrived. I was glad for their joy. I placed the napkins on the counter and took my spot by the sink. Lily sat near the end of the couch, feet tucked under a book unopened in her lap. When gifts were handed out, Margaret made a gentle show of matching tags to names around the main tree. A few presents for us sat near the wall, set aside with cards addressed in careful cursive. I thanked everyone. I meant it. I also felt something firm inside me pick up speed. The pattern held. Some years we sat in a hallway with an extra chair pulled from the garage. "Just for tonight," someone would say while passing a dish overhead. Some years the call never came, and I watched snow stack on the windowsill while Lily built a fort of pillows and paper stars. When we did come, there were small remarks delivered with the sweetness of a suggestion. "If you worked at Andrew's office, you'd have benefits," Margaret would say, as if she were offering a second slice of pie. Dennis would ask where I saw myself in 5 years, trying on the tone he used with young associates at his firm. Brooke would pat my arm and murmur, "You know Mom worries," then beam as her children lined up for a picture in front of the mantel. The camera flashed. I lifted my chin and smiled when it turned our way. I kept bringing something to share, always homemade, always labeled, always placed near the back to avoid rearranging the scene. The roast turkey was Brooke's favorite recipe. The dessert selection followed Brooke's preferences the way seasons follow the calendar. A choir from church arrived one year and sang while Brooke and Andrew came in through the front hall, someone recording the moment on a phone for a social post. I held Lily's coat and watched. It wasn't that there was no kindness anywhere. It was that kindness had a direction, and it rarely flowed our way. That is how exclusion behaves when dressed in family clothes. It smiles, it nods, it saves the last chair, and tells you it's already promised. On the drive home after one of those dinners, Lily held a small teddy bear a cousin had pressed into her hands. We crossed the bridge, and the city lights did their best to soften the night. "Mom," she said, voice small from the back seat, "why can't we sit at the big table? I saw empty chairs." I kept my eyes on the road and told her there wasn't an easy answer. She nodded like she understood, and I knew she understood more than any child should. I tried solutions. In July of the 6th year, I wrote an email to Margaret and Dennis. I offered to pay for rentals so everyone could fit comfortably. I added that I could host dessert at my place if the house was too crowded. The reply never came. In December, we were shown to the basement again. "It's just simpler," Margaret said, placing a candle on the card table so it looked intentional. The flame flickered when the heat kicked on. Dennis laughed upstairs. I put a hand around my coffee and kept it there for warmth I could measure. There were moments when it seemed a corner might turn. Margaret would compliment Lily's school project and promise to come to her winter concert. The day of the concert, Brooke needed help with something, and Margaret called to say she couldn't make it. "Another time," she said brightly. I thanked her for calling. I hung up and adjusted Lily's scarf, and we walked into the auditorium with the other parents. Lily found me in the crowd when the music began, and her shoulders dropped in relief. She sang with her eyes on me. I watched to the end and clapped until my palms stung. I learned to keep my voice even. When Dennis asked about my future, I told him I was building a client list that could carry a life. When Andrew joked that I could help with pro bono marketing for the firm, I smiled and said I had a full calendar but could recommend colleagues. Brooke's friends asked where I worked, and I explained what brand design meant for small companies trying to become steady companies. If someone's gaze flicked past me toward a conversation more relevant to their evening, I let it pass. I saved my energy for what I could reach. The worst of it didn't come from a single word. It came from the way a year can feel like a page you've already read. We would arrive with a dessert and a sweater for Lily in case the heat ran hot and then cold. We would find our seats once someone pointed. I would cut Lily's turkey and keep her cup from tipping. I would gather our coats at 9, then 9:30, then 10, depending on the tone of the room. I would kiss my mother's cheek, hug my father, thank Brooke for the evening, and walk out into the night that felt a little larger every year. None of it was dramatic, and maybe that's why it stung the way it did. A paper cut doesn't look like much. It only stings every time you use your hand. One December, a neighbor from my parents' street, Mrs. Callahan, caught me in the driveway as I loaded Lily into the car. She was carrying a casserole and wearing a wool hat with a palm that bobbed when she talked. "I don't know how you do it," she said quietly, glancing toward the house. "You and that little one have a grace I haven't seen in a long time." I thanked her and wished her a Merry Christmas. She patted my arm, then turned up the walk. I watched her for a moment and wondered if kindness from a stranger could be enough to balance the ledger for a night. In my apartment after Lily fell asleep, I would sit with my laptop and a cup of tea and work. Color became a language I could trust. Type could be arranged. Shapes could be persuaded to hold a meaning they weren't born with. I answered messages from a coffee shop owner who needed to open by March, and a boutique that wanted a spring line to look like a promise. If the apartment was quiet enough, I could hear the radiator click and the elevator cables hum behind the wall. I put one line beside another until they formed a mark that looked inevitable. I sent drafts. I made revisions. I watched my inbox for contracts and wired deposits and numbers that meant rent was paid and a future could be planned in small steps. The family script didn't change. "We're doing our best for everyone," Margaret would say, handing me a bag of leftovers, as if kindness came in quart containers. "You know how it is with kids," Brooke would add, nodding toward her crowded SUV, as if lives can be weighed on a scale and sorted by necessity. Dennis would throw an arm around my shoulders and say, "You'll find your lane," as if he hadn't already watched me drive the one I'd laid myself. I didn't argue. I carried the bag to my car and tucked it beside Lily's boots. On a year when I almost declined the invitation, arrived with a small note in the margin, "We'd love to see you." I said yes, because hope is stubborn and because Lily liked the way the house looked from the street. When we walked in, the living room was quiet. Brooke and her family were delayed by weather. Margaret met us with a smile and 2 mugs of cocoa. "Sit anywhere," she said, waving at the dining room like it had been waiting for us. I set our gifts under the tree and took a seat near the middle of the table, surprised by how normal it felt to slide a chair, settle Lily beside me, and smooth the napkin across my lap. The doorbell rang 10 minutes later. Brooke swept in with snow in her hair and apologies on her lips. Andrew shook hands. The children hung coats. Margaret floated to the head of the table and looked down the line, mouth opening, then closing. "Let's do this," she said briskly. "Hannah, would you mind moving to the kitchen so the kids can sit with us?" And just like that, the moment reset to the version everyone understood. I gathered our plates without a word, and walked to the kitchen. Lily followed with her cup balanced in both hands. I set us up on the folding chair near the window. The glass was cold when my sleeve brushed it. For a second, I let my hand rest there because the chill felt true. I finished my meal. I washed our dishes when it was over, put on our coats, and walked us to the car. Snow had begun in earnest. The street was quiet except for one house on the corner with blue lights framed in the window. Lily tapped my arm. "It's pretty," she said. I agreed because it was. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at the small table in my kitchen with a notebook and a pen I saved for contracts. I wrote down numbers I knew by heart and others I had been studiously avoiding. Rent, utilities, groceries, school supplies, gas, monthly income average and low. A column for savings with a circle around it. I drew a rectangle and wrote table at the top, then crossed it out and wrote room, then crossed that out and wrote place. I closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf where I kept the best things, Lily's first painting, the little stone she called Lucky, a photo of us in wool hats on a day so bright we had to squint. I turned out the light. In the morning I made pancakes and packed Lily's lunch. She went to school with a grin because there would be a class party and paper crowns. I walked to the subway with my thermos and the winter sun slanting across the street. In the glass of the corner shop, I caught our reflection for a second, the woman with the bag strapped across her chest, and the girl with a backpack that looked too big, and I didn't look away. The day started on time. The inbox filled. I answered as I have always answered. By midday, a new message arrived from a manager at a small health startup asking if I could present a proposal after the first of the year. I wrote back yes and set a calendar reminder. I closed my eyes for a breath and saw the folding chair. I opened them and pictured a long oak table I had never touched, and the light falling across it like it belonged to me. The pattern had been named, and once named, it would not return to sleep. What I didn't know then was how quickly that quiet thought would grow teeth. What I did know was this: I was done asking where to sit. And the next winter, when the first snow hit the city, and the same house lit up like a magazine cover, I would be building something no one could move me from. The following winter came quickly. Boston dressed itself in white, and every corner store window glowed with wreaths and twinkling lights. I was still working out of my small apartment, a desk wedged between the kitchen table and the radiator. But something inside me had shifted. The nights I once spent wondering why I was never invited now belonged to work, quiet, steady work that carried its own kind of peace. I had grown used to the rhythm drop Lily off at school, answer client messages, sketch logo drafts, while coffee cooled beside me, then pick her up just before the streetlights came on. When she was doing homework, I edited design files sometimes until my eyes blurred. On weekends, she helped me pack samples or handwrite thank you cards for clients. We didn't have much, but we had purpose. The family invitations had thinned to almost nothing. I told myself it was easier that way, yet every December when the mail brought another glossy photo of Brooke's family in matching sweaters, the silence from my parents still stung. I tacked Lily's drawings to the refrigerator door, covering the space where the pictures used to hang. That year, my father called a few days before Christmas. "You coming by?" he asked in a tone that sounded like obligation. "Brooke's family will be here." I hesitated. Then he added, "Your mother said we could set up something in the hallway if it gets crowded." I thanked him and said we had plans. He didn't ask what kind. Our plans turned out to be simple. Lily and I walked through the Boston Common where the trees glittered like stars caught in branches. We stopped for cocoa at a small cafe on Charles Street, then carried our cups to the footbridge to watch the frozen pond shimmer under the moonlight. She slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "It's prettier than Nana's house." I smiled and said, "It is." In that quiet, I realized this was the first Christmas that didn't hurt. When January came, so did new work. A local coffee chain asked me to redesign their logo and packaging. It wasn't a large contract, but it meant I could finally hire part-time help. That's when Sophie Lynn came into my life, a sharp, cheerful designer who worked evenings at a print shop and freelanced by day. She helped with scheduling proposals and the details I used to juggle alone. For the first time in years, my days found balance. I could make dinner before it was dark, watch Lily's school play without checking my phone, and still meet deadlines. The small victories added up. I began saving more than a few $100s at a time. Each month I opened a separate account labeled Future. I didn't know exactly what it was for yet, only that it felt like a door waiting to open. Spring arrived late that year with cold rain that refused to quit. I worked from cafes when the apartment felt too small. Sophie would meet me with her laptop, and together we'd go through client notes. "You should expand," she said one afternoon. "Start branding full companies, not just projects." I laughed and told her I wasn't ready, but her words stayed with me. By summer, that small account labeled Future had grown thicker. Each deposit was a quiet promise to myself. And then in September, something changed. A health startup based in Cambridge reached out through my website. They needed a full branding system, logo, colors, design, guide, everything. It was more work than I'd ever taken on alone, but it was also the kind of contract that could change my life. I prepared the proposal like it was my last chance. Late nights blurred into mornings. When the presentation day arrived, I took the subway across the river, wearing my one good blazer and carrying a portfolio printed on crisp white paper. The meeting lasted 2 hours, but when the executives thanked me for my time, I still couldn't read their faces. 2 weeks later, the email arrived. Contract approved. The total was more than I'd earned in an entire year. I sat in the cafe where I had once struggled to afford coffee, staring at the screen until the letters blurred. When I finally blinked, tears spilled down. It wasn't pride. It was relief, the kind that softens your whole body. That contract changed everything. I hired Sophie full-time. We rented a small office near the harbor with 2 desks, a shared printer, and sunlight that hit the floor in the afternoons. I bought Lily a sturdy desk of her own at home so she could draw while I worked. The space felt alive. Work flowed in boutiques, bakeries, small medical practices, all wanting someone to make their dreams look real. I didn't advertise. Clients came through word of mouth. One of them told me, "You listen better than anyone." I carried those words home, repeating them softly because they reminded me that quiet could be power too. Through all of it, I kept our life modest. I still drove the same old Corolla with the heater that groaned in winter. I still cooked dinner in the same kitchen with one flickering light. When my parents asked about work, I gave short answers, busy but good. They nodded, assuming it meant barely getting by. I didn't correct them. For once, their underestimation gave me peace. The next Christmas came and went without an invitation. Brooke sent a message afterward, a photo of her family in front of the tree, everyone smiling under silver garland. "Mom missed you this year," she wrote. I didn't reply. I had stopped waiting for doors that never opened. Instead, Lily and I created our own traditions. We baked gingerbread and left a plate on the windowsill for the neighbors. We walked through the city, bundled in scarves, admiring the shop windows filled with toy trains and glass ornaments. I told her we could make our own table someday, and she nodded like she already believed it. Over the following year, the company grew. I brought on 2 more designers and a project manager to help with invoices. The office filled with laughter and the smell of coffee. Sophie organized team lunches, and Lily sometimes stopped by after school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She'd sit in the corner sketching while the rest of us discussed color palettes and brand strategy. Seeing her there made every sleepless night worth it. Then one March morning, a real estate listing appeared in my inbox. Sophie had sent it with a short note, "You should see this." It was a small, rundown beachfront resort in Cape Cod, 16 rooms, cracked pool tiles, and a faded sign. The price was shockingly low. I opened each photo and felt my pulse quicken. The place was broken, yes, but it had potential. The kind of potential that looked like freedom. For days I couldn't stop thinking about it. I imagined Lily running across the sand, the smell of salt in the air, the sound of waves against the shore. I thought about how many times I'd been told there wasn't enough space, and how that sentence had followed me like a shadow. What if I could build a place where space was the very thing we offered? I printed the listing and pinned it above my desk. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" I nodded, though the truth was I was terrified. I had never run anything beyond my small company. But that fear felt different, less like danger, more like the tremor that comes before something new begins. Over the next few weeks, I met with banks, filled out forms, gathered records. I prepared a proposal for an SBA loan documenting every bit of progress from the past 2 years, every client contract, every dollar earned. I spent nights reviewing spreadsheets while Lily slept beside me, her breathing soft and even. The waiting was agony. Days passed without updates, and each time the phone rang, my stomach tightened. Then one gray afternoon, the email came. "Your loan has been approved." I stared at the words, half afraid they'd vanish if I blinked. When I finally exhaled, I called Sophie first. She screamed through the phone. Then I called Lily into the room, lifted her off the couch, and spun her around. She laughed, her voice ringing like bells. 2 weeks later, I drove to Cape Cod with the keys clutched in my hand. The resort stood silent at the edge of the beach, weathered but waiting. The sea stretched wide and endless, the wind lifting my hair as if to say, "Welcome." I stood there until the sun began to set, the sky painted in orange and gold. For the first time, I felt the weight of every cold Christmas melt into something else, something like beginning. That night, I unlocked the door to the lobby, the scent of salt and old wood filling the air. Dust coated the counters, but I could already see it transformed. A long oak table, a tree in the corner, soft lights glowing in the windows. It wouldn't happen overnight, but it would happen. I ran my fingers over the faded counter, smiling. "This is it, Lily," I whispered, even though she wasn't there. "We finally have our own place." And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the start of what would come next. The first morning I walked into Seabright Haven as its new owner, the air carried the scent of salt and dust. The front doors groaned open hinges protesting years of neglect. A cold draft drifted through the lobby, curling around the cracked tile and faded drapes. Still beneath the ruin, I could see what it could become. The windows faced the ocean, wide and clear. The light poured in, as if trying to reclaim the place. I set down my bag, brushed the dust from the counter, and whispered to the empty air, "Let's start." Renovation became my life. For months, every day began before sunrise. I drove the 90 miles from Boston to the Cape, coffee in hand, Lily still half asleep in the back seat when school was out. The resort looked tired but proud, a shell waiting for warmth. The roof leaked, the wiring was decades old, and half the rooms smelled of seawater and thyme. Contractors came and went, painters, electricians, carpenters, all shaking their heads before promising they could make it right. I kept notebooks full of sketches and numbers, each page smudged with pencil dust and coffee stains. Sophie managed calls, invoices, and suppliers from our small office in Boston, her voice always steady when mine faltered. There were days I wondered if I had made a mistake. The bills piled higher than I'd expected. Delays stretched weeks. One afternoon, a storm blew through and tore off part of the siding we'd just replaced. I sat in my car that night, rain drumming on the windshield, staring at the half-lit building through the blur of water. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to fit into someone else's idea of a family table, about every folding chair and every polite smile. Then I started the engine again. Giving up wasn't part of the plan. Little by little, the work began to take shape. The rooms were repainted in shades of sea glass and cream, the floors relaid in warm wood that caught the morning light. I planted hydrangeas along the path to the beach, their blooms standing bright against the gray sand. I could see the future in each repair, the sound of footsteps across the new porch, the smell of breakfast in a space once left empty. When Lily visited on weekends, she ran barefoot through the halls, laughter echoing against fresh plaster. "It's like a castle," she told me, and for a moment the exhaustion lifted. 9 months later, Seabright Haven stood reborn. The roof gleamed in the sun, the pool shimmered with clear water, and the name on the new sign glowed in brushed bronze. I'd chosen the name because it felt like what we had needed all those years, a place that offered light to anyone left out in the dark. The heart of the resort was the restaurant, which I named Evergreen Table. Its name came from the promise I had whispered to Lily that first winter, the promise that we'd build our own table one day. Inside, a long oak table stretched across the center of the room, able to seat 20 people. Etched into its surface were the words, "For everyone who was ever told there's no room." When the carpenter finished carving the line, he stood back, wiping the sawdust from his hands. "That's something," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. It felt like a monument, not just furniture. The rest of the space carried the spirit of home. A Christmas tree stood year-round in the lobby, its decorations changing with the seasons, but its lights always glowing. The restaurant served New England dishes with a few global twists, clam chowder, besides spiced roasted vegetables, baked fish with lemon and herbs, and Lily's favorite hot chocolate cake with extra cream. Every detail mattered, from the sea blue linens to the candlelight that turned the glass windows gold at sunset. When the final inspection passed, I signed the last papers with trembling hands. Standing outside that evening, the sky burned orange over the ocean. I looked at the rows of rooms, the polished lobby windows, and felt the weight of years slide off my shoulders. It was done. We had built something no one could take away. Opening day came in July. The air was thick with the scent of salt and sunscreen. I'd invited only a few close friends, neighbors, who once helped me when Lily was sick. Sophie and her husband, and the teachers who had encouraged Lily when my parents wouldn't attend her recitals. Everyone arrived, smiling voices, carrying through the bright lobby as sunlight streamed across the floor. Lily wore a white dress with a pale blue ribbon and darted between guests like a spark of light. When we walked to the beach that afternoon, she ran ahead, her feet sinking into the soft sand. "Mom, this is ours," she asked, turning to me with wind-blown hair and a grin that reached her eyes. "Ours," I said, my throat tight. She bent down, drew a heart in the sand, and wrote the word home inside it. The tide crept close but didn't wash it away. That evening we had dinner in Evergreen Table. The lights glowed amber, and the windows reflected the ocean's fading blue. Lily sat across from me, swinging her legs under the seat. When the server brought her the hot chocolate cake, she laughed so hard she nearly dropped her spoon. "It tastes just like yours," she said, "only fancier." I smiled and told her that was the point. Some things should still feel familiar. When night came, we stood on the balcony of our suite, the waves crashing in rhythm below. Lily leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "Let's spend Christmas here this year. Just us." I wrapped my arm around her and nodded. For the first time in my life, the thought of Christmas didn't hurt. The resort filled slowly over the next few months. Families escaping the city, couples looking for quiet weekends, travelers who stumbled upon it by chance. Sophie managed bookings and marketing, handling it all with ease. She told me one afternoon, "You know, people aren't just coming for the view. They can feel something here." I didn't ask what she meant, but I knew. The warmth in the walls came from the nights I'd worked by lamplight, the mornings I'd driven through fog, the years of trying to prove I belonged. By November, Seabright Haven was thriving. The restaurant's reservation list grew longer each week, and guests left notes on comment cards saying they felt at home. Sometimes I read them late at night after Lily had gone to bed, the sound of waves outside blending with her soft breathing. That December, for the first time in 10 years, I didn't wait for an invitation from my parents. The old ache still lingered, but I knew better now. Lily and I decorated the resort's tree together, stringing ornaments shaped like seashells and stars. When the guests gathered around the long oak table on Christmas Eve, I watched them share laughter, and food strangers turned into a family for the night. I stood at the edge of the room, listening to the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and realized that the thing I'd wanted most had already happened. We had built our table. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but for belonging. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked down to the beach. The sky stretched wide and quiet, a handful of stars glittering above the dark water. I let the cold air sting my cheeks, then closed my eyes and whispered a small thank you to the wind, to the sea, to the girl who once stood outside her parents' door with gifts she never got to give. The following spring brought new ideas, new guests, and new beginnings. Word of the resort spread, and inquiries started coming from companies and event planners. Sophie and I worked long hours preparing proposals, refining designs, and expanding our small team. The work was exhausting, but it felt different now, rooted in purpose, not survival. One morning, as we reviewed a calendar full of bookings, Sophie looked up from her laptop. "You should plan something for yourself," she said. "A celebration for everything you've built." I laughed, shaking my head. But later that night, the idea stayed with me. I thought about the aunts and neighbors who had once slipped cookies into Lily's hands when no one else noticed us. I thought about the teachers, the old clients, the quiet friends who'd stood beside me when I had nothing. Maybe it was time to open our doors to them, not as guests, but as family. As the evening breeze swept through the open windows, I looked toward the glowing sign outside. The waves rolled in slow and steady against the shore. I realized I wanted to share this light, not keep it tucked away. And with that thought, the next chapter began to take shape, an invitation written not out of duty, but out of gratitude. Planning the grand opening of Seabright Haven felt nothing like the projects I had handled before. It wasn't just about decor menus or lighting. This time, every decision carried a quiet message, a chance to honor the people who had stood beside me when no one else did. Sophie and I worked for weeks on the details, shaping the day with care instead of extravagance. I wanted it to feel like coming home, not a spectacle. We sent invitations to the people who had lifted me during the hardest years, the teachers who praised Lily's drawings when her grandparents forgot her birthday, the neighbors who helped when my car broke down, the friends who brought soup when I was too exhausted to cook. Each invitation came with a photo of the long oak table in Evergreen Table, the words carved across it shining faintly in the afternoon light, "For everyone who was ever told there's no room." On each card I wrote a few sentences by hand, thanking them for the small, steady kindnesses that had once kept me afloat. The replies came back almost immediately. My inbox filled with messages from people saying they couldn't wait to come, some asking if they could bring their children or partners. A few called to tell me how proud they were, their voices warm with emotion that made me pause and catch my breath. It had been a long time since I'd been surrounded by this kind of kindness, honest, unforced, and freely given. The morning of the opening arrived wrapped in sunlight. The Cape air smelled of salt and new beginnings. I wore a sea blue dress and helped Lily into a white one with a ribbon tied neatly around her waist. She twirled in front of the mirror, her laughter spilling through the quiet room. "Do I look like the boss's daughter?" she asked, eyes shining. "You look like the heart of this place," I said, straightening her bow. By noon, the guests began to arrive. Cars pulled up along the drive and familiar faces stepped out, each carrying something: flowers, small gifts, homemade desserts. I met them at the entrance, the same spot where I had once stood alone months ago, unsure if I could finish what I had started. Now it was filled with the sound of greetings and the hum of voices. My Aunt Susan hugged me, first tears glistening behind her glasses. "Your grandmother would have been proud," she whispered. Uncle Martin followed, smiling shyly, his eyes sweeping over the building. "You built this?" he asked, half in disbelief. "We did," I answered, glancing toward Lily, who was already showing guests to their rooms like a proud little host. The opening celebration took place inside the grand hall. The long oak table glowed under warm lights, every seat adorned with linen napkins and small glass vases holding white hydrangeas. As the guests settled, I noticed something remarkable. No one sat at the edges trying to disappear. Every chair was filled with conversation, laughter, and clinking glasses. For the first time, no one was left standing in a corner. Sophie stood at my side, her face beaming. "You did it," she whispered. I shook my head. "We did." The first course arrived clam chowder served in wide porcelain bowls, and soon the room was alive with the sound of spoons and cheerful chatter. Across the table, Lily leaned forward giggling at something her teacher had said. I watched her memorizing the sight of her face glowing in the candlelight. When the main course was served, I stood to speak. My heart pounded, but my voice came steady. I wanted to thank each of you for being here, I said. When this resort was still just an idea, I promised myself that one day I would build a table long enough for everyone who had ever been told there wasn't enough room. This place exists because of people like you, people who made space for me and my daughter when others wouldn't. For a heartbeat, the room went still. Then the applause began gentle at first, then rising until it filled the hall. I glanced down at Lily. She was clapping too, eyes shining. The sound swelled like the tide outside washing through the air, until I could no longer tell if the warmth on my cheeks was from tears or the lights above. After dinner, the doors to the terrace opened. Fireworks lit up the beach beyond the resort, bursting in streaks of gold and white that reflected off the water. Lily gasped, grabbing my hand. "Mom, you did this for everyone," she asked, her voice hushed with wonder. "For everyone who ever stood outside the door," I said softly. She leaned against me, her small fingers curling into mine as the colors shimmered across the waves. It was nearly midnight when the last guests left, their laughter still echoing faintly down the walkway. I stood in the lobby surrounded by the quiet hum of the building, the low whir of lights, the soft rush of ocean air through the open doors. Sophie helped me gather empty glasses, humming to herself. "You know," she said, stacking plates, "you should be ready. Someone from your family will hear about this." I smiled faintly. They always do. She was right. 2 weeks later, the call came. I was sitting in the office reviewing bookings when my phone buzzed. My mother's name flashed across the screen. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The last time we'd spoken had been months before her voice clipped and formal. I almost let it ring out, but something inside me said to answer. "Hannah." She began, her tone cautious. "I just heard from your cousin Benjamin. You opened a resort." "That's right," I said evenly. "I can't believe it," she continued. "You didn't say a word to anyone. I had to hear it from someone else." Her voice wavered between surprise and accusation, the same edge it had carried all my life. Before I could respond, another voice cut in, Brooks, sharp and indignant. "You really are selfish. You open a resort and don't even invite family. Are you trying to embarrass us?" The air seemed to tighten around me. I drew a slow breath before speaking. "Brooke, for 10 years, you and Mom left Lily and me sitting in basements and hallways. Sometimes you didn't invite us at all. You made your choices then." Silence followed, broken only by my mother's quick inhale. I pressed on steady. "Do you remember the year I offered to pay for extra tables so everyone could fit? You ignored that message, and when I asked to help decorate, you said the space was already full." "I was busy," my mother muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Brooke gave a small, bitter laugh. "You're always the victim, Hannah. This resort is just your way of showing off." I felt my hands tremble, but kept my tone calm. If I wanted to show off, I would have done it years ago when my business took off. I built Seabright Haven so my daughter and the people who deserve it would always have a seat. That's all. On the other end, my mother's voice softened. "Honey, I never wanted things to turn out like this. I just wanted everyone to be happy." I looked out the window at the ocean, the waves slow and endless under the pale afternoon light. "You wanted everyone to be happy," I said quietly, "but you never included us in that everyone." No one replied. The silence stretched long before the call ended. I set the phone down, my heart pounding, but lighter somehow. Sophie stepped into the office doorway, reading my expression without a word. She placed a cup of tea on my desk and gave a small nod. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat in the lobby beside the long oak table. The words carved into its surface glimmered under the soft light. I traced the letters with my fingertips, the wood warm beneath my hand. "For everyone who was ever told there's no room." I whispered the words aloud, as if they belonged to a prayer. For the first time in years, the memory of standing outside my parents' house in the cold no longer hurt. It felt distant, like a chapter I had already closed. Still deep down, I knew this story with my family wasn't over yet. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the faint hum of the sea beyond the glass doors, and wondered how long it would take before the next call came, because in families like mine, silence never lasts forever. Autumn rolled into Boston, carrying the scent of rain and falling leaves. I hadn't heard from my family since that last phone call, but I knew silence with them was never permanent. It arrived like a storm that pretended to be peace-quiet at first, then sudden and demanding. I was sitting in my office one gray afternoon when the call came again. The number flashed across the screen before I even picked up. "Hannah, my mother," began her voice soft, almost sweet. "Thanksgiving's coming up. I want you and Lily to come home this year. The whole family will be there." She said it like the last 10 years hadn't happened, like the words folding chairs in the kitchen had never left her lips. I leaned back in my chair. "Is it still the same 7-seat table?" I asked, half expecting her to hang up. She hesitated. "Yes, but we'll make it work. You can bring the folding chairs from the hall if you need to. The important thing is that we're together." The air in the room went still. "Mom," I said quietly, "I won't bring my daughter to sit in the kitchen ever again." There was a pause, then her voice cracked just enough to reveal the old irritation beneath. "You're still holding on to that 'I just want a normal Thanksgiving.' We'll have one," I said, "just not there." And before she could respond, I ended the call. My hand shook slightly as I set the phone down, but the heaviness in my chest began to ease. That night, I decided to do something different. Instead of shrinking from another family holiday, I would build my own. I opened my notebook, the same one that held the first sketches of Seabright Haven, and began to plan. Invitations, menus, decorations. I wanted it to be a celebration for everyone who had ever been left out. Sophie helped me organize the event, her energy steady and bright. We sent invitations to the people who had stood quietly in the background of my life: Aunt Susan, who had once slipped me grocery money without a word; Uncle Martin, whose warmth had always felt like home; neighbors who had lent a hand when my car broke down; and friends who had never asked me to explain the gaps in my family stories. I called it Thanksgiving at Seabright Haven, though it was more than that. It was a promise. No folding chairs, no basement dinners, just one long table filled with laughter and light. The day arrived with crisp air and a golden sky. The resort shimmered under the soft glow of autumn, the beach still bright even in November. I wore a cream sweater and tied my hair back while Lily darted around placing name cards on the oak table. She hummed as she worked, her excitement contagious. "Mom, do we have enough chairs?" she asked. "Plenty," I said with a smile. "Enough for everyone." By afternoon, the hall was filled with the smell of roasted turkey cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie. Guests began to arrive, their coats dusted with the chill of the season. Aunt Susan walked in first, carrying a pie still warm from her oven. "You've outdone yourself," she said, looking around in awe. "It feels like something out of a storybook." Uncle Martin followed with a basket of apples, his grin wide. "This is what family should look like," he said softly as he took his seat. Soon the room was alive with chatter and music. The table glowed under soft candlelight reflections of gold and silver flickering across the glassware. I moved through the crowd, refilling drinks, sharing smiles, and soaking in the sound of genuine joy. There were no cold stares or whispered comparisons, just people who wanted to be there. When everyone had settled, I stood at the head of the table and raised my glass. "To those who know what it means to build their own place," I said, "and to the people who reminded me that family isn't about where you come from, but who stands beside you." A chorus of glasses clinked in response. Lily leaned against my arm, whispering, "Mom, this is the best Thanksgiving ever." I looked down at her and knew she was right. The evening unfolded with stories and laughter. Uncle Martin told a joke that had everyone in tears, and Sophie played the piano softly in the corner. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore. When dessert arrived, Lily insisted on serving slices of Aunt Susan's pie herself, handing each plate to guests with careful pride. After dinner, we took photos around the long table, 28 faces glowing in the warm light, smiling wide. When I posted them later that night, I didn't expect the ripple it would cause. Within days, messages began pouring in: old friends, distant relatives, even people I barely knew asking why my parents hadn't been there. Weren't they invited? Someone wrote beneath one photo. Another comment read, "This looks like a real family. Beautiful." I didn't reply, but the truth spread faster than I could have imagined. My parents had spent years maintaining the illusion of a perfect home, but the pictures from Seabright Haven told a different story, one filled with love they had chosen to ignore. A week later, my father called. His voice was tight-controlled. "Your mother's been upset," he began. "People are talking. Why weren't we at that dinner?" "You were invited years ago," I said calmly. "Every Christmas, every holiday after that, you just never saw the invitation because it didn't look like what you expected." He exhaled hard through the phone. "Hannah, this is childish. You're humiliating your family. I built a life where my daughter doesn't have to beg for a seat," I said. "If that humiliates you, then maybe the problem isn't mine." He didn't respond. The silence between us felt final heavy with years that couldn't be undone. When the call ended, I sat in my office staring at the ocean through the window. The tide rolled in and out, steady as breath erasing footprints one wave at a time. The following week, Lily and I walked along the beach at sunset. The sand was cool beneath our feet, and the sky burned with streaks of orange and violet. She ran ahead laughing as she chased the edge of the water. I watched her thinking of how far we had come from those long winters outside my parents' door. She stopped and turned back to me, wind in her hair. "Mom," she called out, "can we have Thanksgiving here every year?" "With everyone," I nodded. "Every year, sweetheart." She smiled and went back to drawing hearts in the sand. Behind her, the waves rose and fell in a rhythm that felt like peace. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the resort was quiet, I sat at the long oak table with a single candle still burning. The wood gleamed beneath the light, the carved words catching the faint glow. "For everyone who was ever told, there's no room." I ran my fingers across them and whispered, "There's room now." The phone lay silent beside me. I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. My family had never been good at letting go of control, and sooner or later another call would come, another demand wrapped in the disguise of reconciliation. But this time, I wasn't afraid of it. I looked toward the windows where the moonlight shimmered on the water and felt a quiet certainty settle over me. Whatever came next, I had already built the life they said I couldn't, and soon enough that truth would be impossible for them to ignore. Winter came in slow and silver, wrapping the Cape in a soft quiet. Seabright Haven had settled into a steady rhythm, guests booking months ahead, the restaurant full most weekends, and Lily's laughter echoing through the halls. I had learned the pattern of the sea, the pull and release that came with each season. Peace had become part of the air itself. It lasted until early December, when a familiar voice returned to break it. My mother called again this time, with something rehearsed in her tone. "Hannah," she began, "your sister is hosting a Christmas Eve dinner this year. She thought it would be nice if you and Lily joined. Just family. We'd like to put everything behind us." I listened in silence. For a long time, I'd imagined what those words might sound like. We'd like to put everything behind us, but hearing them now didn't feel like peace. It felt like a door opening only because someone needed to come in out of the cold. "I appreciate the invitation," I said slowly, "but we'll be here." The resort hosts its annual Christmas dinner for guests and staff. Her disappointment was quick and sharp. "It's one night, Hannah. Your father's been asking for you. Brooke wants her kids to know their aunt. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Something inside me tightened. "Mom, you made it hard years ago. I just stopped carrying the weight of it." Before she could answer, I added softly, "If you want to see us, you're welcome to come here." She didn't respond right away. Then she said, almost to herself, "Cape Cod on Christmas Eve. That's quite a distance. Not farther than the distance you've already put between us," I said, and ended the call. In the weeks that followed, work carried on. Sophie and the team transformed the resort into a holiday postcard. Evergreen garlands framed the windows, strings of lights shimmered across the dining hall, and the tree stood 12 feet tall, dressed in gold and glass ornaments. Lily helped hang the final star at the top, standing on a ladder while guests clapped. It was the kind of Christmas I used to dream of, a room full of warmth where everyone belonged. 3 days before Christmas, the snow began to fall. The wind swept through the dunes and the air turned to crystal. I was in the restaurant checking final details when Sophie came in holding her phone. "You'll want to see this," she said. Her voice was careful. She handed me the screen. A social media post glowed there, Brooke's smiling family, around a gleaming dinner table, the caption reading, "Christmas Eve at the Parkers, can't wait to see everyone. Family first." Below it, a comment from my mother counting down the hours. "It'll be perfect this year." I handed the phone back, the air in my chest suddenly thin. Sophie hesitated. "You don't have to look at this stuff, Hannah. You've built something better here." "I know," I said, but my voice came out quiet. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the lobby under the glow of the Christmas lights. The ocean outside was dark, restless. I thought about all the years I'd spent waiting for a seat at that table and how strange it felt to be free of it, yet still feel the echo of its emptiness. On Christmas Eve morning, the phone rang again. This time it was Brooke. "Hey," she said too brightly. "I wanted to check if you're really not coming. Mom made your favorite casserole. Dad bought that wine you used to like. You could surprise everyone." I leaned against the window, watching the snow drift down in slow circles. "Brooke, you don't get to play the good sister now," I said evenly. "You spent years reminding me there wasn't space for us." She sighed. "You're still so sensitive. Things change, Hannah. Families forgive. You can't hold on to every slight forever." "It wasn't a slight," I said. "It was a pattern. And I learned to stop being part of it." "Fine," she snapped. "But don't say I didn't try. Mom and Dad have been through enough." I looked at the tree reflected in the glass, its lights flickering softly. "We've all been through enough," I said. Then I hung up. By evening, the resort was alive. Guests filled the hall in warm sweaters and scarves, music floating through the air. Evergreen table glowed like something out of a painting, the oak polished the candles flickering in their holders. I moved through the room, greeting everyone, making sure every plate was full. Lily sat at the center of the table between Aunt Susan and Sophie, her eyes wide with joy as she helped pass bread baskets and pour cider. "Mom," she called out, waving me over, "we saved you a seat." For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. The sight of that chair waiting for me without condition felt like a gift I hadn't known I still needed. I joined them, the warmth of the room wrapping around me like a second skin. Halfway through dinner, as the laughter rolled through the room, Sophie touched my arm. "There's someone outside asking for you," she said gently. I glanced toward the window. Through the falling snow, a figure stood near the entrance, bundled in a long coat. My heart skipped. I excused myself and walked toward the doors, the cold rushing in as they opened. My mother stood there, her cheeks red from the wind. Behind her, headlights glowed faintly in the parking lot. "Mom," I said, my breath visible in the freezing air. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled in a way that almost hit her nerves. "I wasn't sure you'd really invite us," she said. "Dennis and Brooke thought I was crazy driving all this way." I nodded slowly. "They didn't come." "No," she said. "They had their dinner. I wanted to see this place." I stepped aside. "Come in then. You shouldn't be out in the cold." Inside, the lobby shimmered with light. She stopped near the entrance, her eyes taking in the garland, the tree, the laughter from the dining hall. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You did all this yourself." "With help," I said. "But yes." She turned toward me, her voice quieter now. "I didn't realize how much you built until I saw it with my own eyes. I think I underestimated you." The words hung between us, fragile as glass. I could see the strain in her face, the conflict between pride and regret. "You didn't have to," I said softly. "You just had to make room." Her eyes welled with tears, and for once, she didn't hide them. "I'm sorry, Hannah, for all of it. For the years I made you feel small. I thought I was protecting the family, keeping peace, but I see now I was just choosing sides." I swallowed hard. "It's late for apologies, Mom, but I'm glad you came." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to tell you that you were never the problem." The sound of laughter drifted from the dining hall, warm and steady. I looked toward it, then back at her. "There's a seat at the table if you want it," I said. "No conditions." Her gaze followed mine, softening. "Not tonight," she said after a moment. "I think this is your night, but maybe another time." She reached out, hesitated, then squeezed my hand. The touch was brief but real. "Merry Christmas, Hannah. Merry Christmas, Mom." I watched as she walked back into the snow, her figure small against the wide white night. When the doors closed, I stood there for a while listening to the muffled hum of voices behind me. Then I returned to the table. Lily beamed when she saw me. "Did someone come to visit?" "Yes," I said, sitting beside her. "Someone who needed to see what love looks like when it's real." She tilted her head curious, but didn't ask more. The music played softly, and around us people clinked glasses and shared stories. The light shimmered above the oak table, catching the carved words in a golden glow. As the night went on, I felt something shift, something small but certain, like a tide changing beneath the surface. I didn't know what my mother's visit would bring, but I knew this much: the circle had begun to close, and this time I was the one deciding who got to belong. The morning after Christmas arrived soft and pale, the ocean outside my window as calm as glass. Snow still dusted the dunes, and the world felt new in a way that words couldn't quite hold. The guests were gone, the halls quiet, except for the faint echo of music that lingered from the night before. Lily slept late, her hair tangled across the pillow, her small hand curled around the stuffed bear she'd had since she was 2. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, thinking about my mother's visit. The image of her standing in the snow stayed with me. The hesitation in her eyes, the way her voice trembled when she said she was sorry. For the first time, her apology hadn't sounded like a performance. It had sounded human, tired, and real. I didn't know what would come of it, but I knew one thing: I no longer needed her approval to feel whole. That realization was quiet, almost unnoticeable, like the moment before sunrise. For so many years, I had built everything: my company, my resorts, my independence, on the unspoken wish to be seen. Now, I simply wanted peace. By January, Seabright Haven was thriving again, and guests were already booking months in advance. But I found myself craving something different, a slower rhythm, a place where the air smelled of pine instead of salt. So I drove north to Vermont to oversee final renovations at Pinecrest Lodge. The snow there fell heavier, muffling the world in soft white silence. It reminded me of the years I'd spent walking through life unheard, and how those same winters had shaped my strength. Lily loved it there. She made friends with the staff, helped serve hot chocolate to guests, and spent afternoons skating on the frozen pond. Watching her laugh among people who saw her for who she was, not as an afterthought, not as someone else's shadow, felt like healing. One evening, as we sat by the fire, I noticed a letter on the front desk. It was from my mother. Her handwriting was careful, almost shy. She wrote that she had seen the news article about Seabright Haven's community dinners and how she'd shown it to my father. She said he didn't speak much afterward, only nodded quietly, as if finally understanding what those years of exclusion had done. The letter ended with 6 simple words: "I'm trying to do better, Hannah." I read it twice, then folded it gently. I didn't cry. I just felt an unexpected calm settle over me, like the sound of snow falling on rooftops. People change in small steps, not grand gestures. Maybe this was her first. In the months that followed, I kept building slowly, thoughtfully. Pinecrest Lodge opened to the public that spring. Families came for long weekends, couples for quiet getaways. I hired local staff, offered workshops for small business owners, and hosted free stays for single parents during the holidays. It wasn't about revenge or proving anything. It was about turning pain into something that could help others find belonging. One evening, after a long day of welcoming guests, I stood on the balcony overlooking the forest. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting the snow in gold. Lily came running up, breathless and bright-eyed, clutching her sketchbook. "Mom," she said, opening it to show me. "Look, I drew our 2 homes, the one by the ocean and the one in the mountains." Her drawings were simple, but full of light. "Which one do you like better?" I asked. She thought for a moment, tapping her pencil against her chin. "Both," she said finally, "because no matter where we go, we always have a seat." Her words settled deep in me. I reached for her hand, and together we watched the last light fade. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I walked down to the lobby. The same oak table design from Seabright Haven stood in the center, polished and strong, with the words carved across it once again, "For everyone who was ever told there's no room." I ran my fingertips over the letters, tracing each one slowly. This time I didn't think about rejection or loss. I thought about resilience, the quiet kind that doesn't shout or demand, but simply endures until it becomes something unshakable. I realized that I had built more than resorts. I had built spaces where people could feel safe, where no one was made small just to make someone else feel big. When morning came, I stood outside as the first guests arrived, their laughter breaking through the cold. The air smelled like fresh pine and promise. Somewhere behind me I could hear Lily calling my name, her voice bright and sure. I smiled, knowing that life had come full circle, not perfectly, but truthfully. The family that once turned us away had lost their illusion of perfection, while we had found a peace they might never understand. If someone had told me years ago that I'd thank the pain that once kept me out in the cold, I wouldn't have believed it. But now I see that every locked door led me here to the freedom of building my own. So if you've ever been told there's no room for you, remember this: you can make your own place. You can build your own table, your own home, your own peace. And when you do, fill it with kindness. Because the truest justice isn't about making others feel what you once felt. It's about creating a world where no one else has to. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of your own journey, take a moment to share it, or maybe just reach out to someone who needs a seat at your table. After all, that's how the light keeps spreading.